Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Founder of Mr. Black Spirits, Tom Baker, joins the program today. Until the brand was acquired by Diageo in 2022, Tom led the business as CEO alongside Master Distiller Philip Moore. The bittersweet Australian liqueur's iconic bottle was created by Tom, who's a designer by trade, and is now known the world over, with everything still produced at their distillery roastery just north of Sydney. Tom and I had been meaning to catch up for a while and finally got the chance to in Melbourne. Thank you so much for joining me on the program today, Tom.
Great to be here, James. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. We've spoken for quite a while, but finally we've actually connected.
We first spoke in 2019.
It's a little while ago. Yeah.
Which is 5 years ago.
That is a long time ago now. I was just talking to you about an interview I did here in the same year, 2019, and it was a very similar room. And I think that was actually about episode 98. I think that was the one. I think it was 98 with Rebecca Gibson and Andy Albaya from Example, who actually represent Diageo's brands, which is funny.
I think if we'd spoken in 2019, it would be a very different interview. Mr. Black in 2019 versus where we are today would have been a very different interview.
Well, I think I tried your products for the first time at a beverage conference here at the Melbourne Museum, maybe 2018, 2019.
Quite possibly.
So I'm really excited to sit down with you. Obviously, you've come a very long way in that time, and I'm excited to pull that out, and the journey is longer than that.
Mr. Black's almost 11 years old now. For so long, we felt like the young new guys, and now I sort of look around and I'm not the youngest person in the room anymore, which I was for a long period of time. So yeah, it feels like just yesterday, but it's like 11 years.
But I mean, you can't be the youngest guy and bought by Diageo, or in the process of being bought by Diageo as well. So bought now, but in that evolution, things happen. So we're going to open that up.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Pleasure.
As you know, the first question that I like to ask on the program is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. I'd love to know what you have for the program today.
My job is pretty much like professional drinker now. So my job is going around to the world's best bars and restaurants.
Responsibly, of course.
The world's best bars and restaurants, and just trying all these amazing drinks and cocktails they make. And the average standard of hospitality now is just wild. Like everyone's read Setting the Table, Danny Meyer. Everyone has just seen all these amazing bars around the world. So thousands of stories about venues going absolutely above and beyond. But the one thing I was thinking about this on the plane down last night, like it's the story of like when we started Mr. Black. I walked into this distillery. Distilleries and breweries and wineries and the people that run them just always have, for generations, had the most incredible hospitality, right? And I remember I walked into this Distillery Britannica, in March of 2013. I just wanted to know more about how spirits were made. Like I was doing a bit of work in the booze industry, but not a lot. I just wanted to know more about the crazy people that sat in sheds and made these spirits that I love to drink. And I just went up one Sunday afternoon and walked into the cellar door at Distillery Britannica and just got talking to Philip. And at the time, Philip was the only employee of Distillery Britannica. It was just him that made the product during the week. And then he worked the cellar door on the weekends. I think he had some help on the Saturday, but he would do Sunday because it was quite quiet. And like anyone that visits the distillery, they can't help but show you around. Even if they're not there for a tour, they're going to walk you through it. But the thing that always strikes you about distilleries and breweries when you walk into them is the smell. And I can still remember what Distillery Britannica smelled like. Like if you've ever been to a brewery, you can smell that fermentation. A distillery, the juniper or the whiskey, it's in the walls, like you can smell it.
I usually
in the place.
smell the wort.
Absolutely.
Like that's what I'm smelling.
From the car park.
Yeah.
From the car park, you can smell these things. So you walk in and straight away you're struck by this incredible aroma of the place. I met Phil and he talked me through the who, what, when, where, why of him, and he's such an interesting chap. But I was about to leave and get back in my car. I think I bought a few bowls of his gin. And he was like, Tom, do you like coffee? And I'm like, oh, geez, I love coffee. I was a very bad barista through uni. Not a career for me. I was not good at it. And had done a bit of work in the coffee space as a designer, but like just obsessed with the stuff. I'm like, oh yeah. And he went to his little fridge and pulled out a little bottle and gave me a taste of this product he was working on. And I was just like, oh my God, what is that? turned out to be a product that Coffee and Liqueur had been working on that subsequently came Mr. Black. But I think it's just that sort of warm, inviting sort of like hug that one gets when they go to a winery or brewery or a cellar door or a distillery for that matter. I'm obsessed with. And I think that's always been part of winemaking and brewing and distilling, and absolutely exemplified in my trip to see Phil. That sort of sample of Mr. Black then led to me to get a bottle from him and sample my wife, who hated it because she hates coffee, so that's a good shout, and gave a sample to my roommates. I was living in a share house at the time and they loved it. I'm like, what is it? I'm like, it's a coffee liqueur. And they're like, oh, we don't drink that. I'm like, well, maybe we should. But that was it. Seriously, that's my single best hospitality experience.
Love that.
And also a cab driver gave me a free lift in December, which I thought was great. I was going to maybe Sammy and he's like, jump in, I'll give you a free lift. When's anyone ever got a free lift from a cab driver in Sydney in December ever? A cab driver, like a proper cab driver.
Not an Uber, not just like a random stranger in a car.
Put my cocktail in the freezer, sure, but give me a free lift in a cab. Oh, that's the stuff.
Okay. Well, tell me then, what is it specifically about that experience in bars, distilleries, breweries, that hospitality experience that you think is so exceptional? Because that's hospitality. Like that, I mean, hospitality is defined by those things. What made that so exceptional for you? Is because it's an important part in your own professional journey, or is it something else? And is it that it's uncommon? And if it is, why is it uncommon? Tell me more about that.
Hospitality for me is just about the act of generosity. And I think that's why, the incredible generosity displayed when you go to like a place where they make stuff is they just want to share their craft with you. And I think that people's generosity with their time and the product they're making and to talk you through it, and they're just sharing their relentless enthusiasm for making these products. And you just can't help but fall in love with them, fall in love with Phil, and fall in love with his distillery, fall in love with their, I mean, how many times have you gone to a winery and thought you weren't going to enjoy what they make, and by the time you leave, you're like, you're
sign up to their program.
Sign up to the wine club and buckling at the knees because you bought so much piss on the way out, So I think that's what I love about visiting people that make stuff, is just how generous they are with their time and how much they want to pass on their enthusiasm for the product they make. And you see that in great bars as well. It's the same thread, that incredible generosity in sharing one's craft with another is just the best. And also putting someone else's needs before your own. I always have so much respect for people that work in bars and restaurants because they work when we don't want to, and that's like our good time is their job, and that's the best. That's the best thing.
How have you applied those sorts of learnings from these experiences? It's something that quite clearly resonates deeply with you. That's something that you really want to embed in your business. How have you applied these sorts of hospitality fundamentals in the work that you do?
We were always, at Mr. Black, one of our company values was always like just be generous. And that was mostly with our time, what limited resources we had, but mostly with our time. And I think like that's the best gift you can give to someone, whether that's in your workplace or with customers or with partners or with suppliers, is just be overwhelmingly generous. And we've always found that has come back in spades.
How do you then balance that with executing, with the pressures of executing? And I imagine, and as much as you like to share in a Diageo environment, that sort of influence would be putting pressure on delivering those sorts of more in terms of the metrics. I'd love to know how you balance the pressure, the business pressures, and then also those pressures of just being generous with your time, with your resources.
Yeah, someone told me when we started Mr. Black that like, and this is so true in the bar industry, right? But like meaningful gestures beats plastic tat. Like in some room in Eastern Europe, I'm sure there's a warehouse full of like Johnny Walker bar mats with the wrong logo on them. You know what I mean? And so I think we worked out really early on that one, we were never going to have that much money. And even though we're much larger than we used to be now, we're still not Johnny Walker, right? So we knew really early on that we were never going to have the budgets to play with the big guys. So how else are we going to grow? Like your ability to grow as a business is really defined about how you get better value for money for your spend in another business, right? So the only way that we could grow faster and better and more authentically than another business is just by being more meaningful. So I think even as we've scaled and we maybe have a bit more money, we used to have zero, so now maybe we have a bit more. As soon as you lose track of making gestures meaningful and substituting meaningful gestures with bar runners, that's where you start to go astray. So I think it has been hard, and especially as you get a bit bigger, making more mindful choices around that, it does become a challenge. But no, I think like as soon as you lose that sense of purpose in what you're doing and just doing what everyone else is doing because they're doing it, that's when it's all over. So I think for us, it's pretty easy to hold on to.
But how do you decide where the line is?
I think as running a business, you want to spend every dollar perfectly, right? It's impossible. So I think what you've got to do is just make sure the majority of what you're doing is going to the right places it should. So often we'll sit down and look at our plans as a business, and you know what, there's a lot of stuff in there. Like, we got to build some cardboard shelf displays for retailers. And is that the most meaningful, impactful work we'll ever do? Well, we quite like them and they look quite good. But no, probably not going to change the world like we'd like to. And if we look at the plan throughout the year and go, hold on, this is all pretty sterile. This is all a pretty boring plan. It's probably not the right plan for us. And equally, like if we look at our plan for the year or the month or the decade, and you could put any other logo on that plan, any other brand name in that plan, it's probably also not the right plan as well. So I suppose for us, we kind of know that there is going to be some waste. We're not going to spend every dollar as perfectly as we can. But when we look at this plan and go, this feels like us. And guess what? There's some stuff in there that we're really proud of and we love. It's good enough. It'll never be perfect.
In that answer there, you said not necessarily change the world like you'd like to.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through how it is that you want to change things?
Absolutely. So at Mr. Black, we exist to bring the culture, passion, community, craft of specialty coffee into the night. And we know that when we use high quality coffees, growers benefit, communities benefit, we benefit because we can make a high quality product that we can ultimately sell for more money. Bars benefit because they can sell a high quality product that they can make more money out of. Everybody wins. So as we grow as a business, if we're ever degrading our product, if we're ever getting away from that mission of bringing specialty coffee to the night, I don't think we're really contributing. We're just profiteering, or we're trying to make something that's not as good as what it was before. So for me, very fundamentally, we just have to look at that mission statement on the wall every day and go, cool, are we doing this? Does this plan for the next 10 years reflect that ultimate mission to bring this lovely Australian craft coffee culture into the night? Are we doing that? Yep, great, good. The world gets better, our product gets better, our business gets better, Australian bars gets better. Brilliant, thumbs up, success. If we look at this plan and a lot of it's not doing that, then it's probably, one, not going to work, and two, we're getting away from the overall mission of the business. So yeah, a useful post-it note to have on the wall.
What do you think other businesses in Australia, you said Mr. Black's been around a while now, 11
11
years.
I think.
Tell me about what you're seeing in the Australian market that other businesses are doing well now that could set them up for success that you've seen. Because kind of success for a lot of Australian distilleries, breweries is getting acquired by the big boys.
It's one
right?
route. It's one route, sure.
It's one big way, like goal that a lot of businesses have. Talk me through that the answer for that question then is quite a complicated thing. There are a lot of factors that have changed. I'd love to know what your thoughts are there.
There are a lot of factors, right? But I think essentially when a lot of businesses start, they view that old build the best mousetrap in the world will be the path to your door, right? If we make the best gin, whiskey, vodka, whatever, people will care about us. And I think now when you were the only one, like Mr. Black, was one of 14 brands in Australia 10 years ago, that was sort of true. But now I think the industry in spirits, but also in beer and wine, we realize there's a lot of brands and a lot of competition. So merely just existing and being another Australian spirit and even being the best one isn't enough. So I think people are working out how to make a brand that's singular, that's distinctive, that's memorable to a consumer, but also differentiated. So what's that thing that makes you intrinsically different? I was listening to a podcast with Stu Gregor the other day. I love this story that he tells where he's like...
Stu Gregor is one of the founders of Four Pillars
Gin, right?
out there.
Absolute god of Australian spirits. And Stu said it's really easy to sell someone the bottle once, right? Like stand in a sample at Dan Murphy's a liquor store, give them a sample, they buy it, right? It's really hard to get someone who buys a bottle of Hendrick's every 2 weeks to get them to make you their favorite regular gin. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Australian spirits are realizing. It's like, it's easy to stand in a liquor store and sell someone a bottle once, but how are we going to build a brand that's so singular and distinctive and memorable and differentiated that we're going to get someone to stop buying that bottle of Hendrick's every 2 weeks and buy a bottle of us, or stop buying that bottle of Chivas every 4 weeks and buy a bottle of Starwood? And I think that thinking is now starting to get into Australian craft beverages where we can't just expect success because we're A, Australian, and B, taste good, because they're sort of like the minimum cost of entry, right? That's like the door prize, that's the ticket cost. What are we doing after that that's going to drive for success for our business? And your point, it means different things to different businesses. Some have realized that, do you know what? We don't need to export. We don't need to be in Dan Murphy's. We can build incredibly profitable, busy cellar doors. These are hospitality businesses, but sell booze, sell bottles on the way out. Brilliant. Some have realized, actually, we can be moderately sized everywhere in the specific niche. Or some, like Mr. Black, have worked out, well, maybe we're never going to be the highest selling spirit in Australia, but maybe we could be really big everywhere. And that's sort of our niche that we sort of worked out. So I think that's the realization everyone's getting to by virtue of competition, by virtue of so many brands and so many great liquids that, wow, we need to be one step different to that to help cut through.
Talk me through the process that actually takes place being reached out to or reaching out to a large player such as Diageo in your case. For the beverage companies or brands out there, FMCG brands, there'll be all sorts of businesses in other spaces listening as well. But what does that sort of process look like? It can take many different forms, I understand. But for you, what did that look like that you went through? And was it a surprise or was it something you were searching for? Talk me through that.
Absolutely. So we got approached by an arm of Diageo, or sort of a joint venture that Diageo has called Distilling Ventures.
Based in the UK.
Based in the UK and also in the US now. And they were on the lookout to support the founders of the future and the spirits companies and drinks companies of the future. And their remit was pretty much like anything in drinks, but not beer or wine, which I love, because it's sort of a broad yet not beer or wine. Is quite nice. So they approached us. So they are a strategic investor insofar as they put money in with the expectation of buying the business at some point in the future. So not like a family office or not like a venture capital or private equity where they look to buy it and then sell it again. They look to buy it, invest in it, and then acquire it. So that was always quite attractive for us. But what most large companies sort of realized about 10 years ago is if these craft brands are the future, how do we play in that space? And I think everyone thinks of these big companies as they can make stuff and push into every outlet in the world and make anything a success overnight. But anyone with any sort of behind the curtain look at any big company knows that that's really not true. And they struggle to make new things popular just as much as startups do. So I think they all sort of realized about 10 years ago, a lot of different booze companies, but also in FMCG, that maybe we should have a venture strategy for companies that should have some big buys, buying Casamigos, for instance. Mm-hmm. We should have some medium-sized stuff. And then also we should be investing in the future of drinks by way of Distill Ventures. So they approached us, again, this is going back a long time, and made a minority investment in Mr. Black back in 2015. And again, relative to the numbers that you read about in investment in booze companies now, if you read the booze news, nothing like that. We're talking relatively small amounts of money. But for us, it was transformational, And so I think a lot of people can sneer when they hear, a small company has investment from, a company like Diageo, where for us it was existential. Like we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be I think at the moment, we're probably the second largest producer of spirits in Australia behind Bundaberg. So it's like we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be roasting our own coffee. We wouldn't have carved this niche of being the global high quality producer of coffee liquors in the world if it wasn't for a very adventurous startup incubator making a pretty small bet in a 24-year-old Tom Baker, back in sort of 2015. So they approached us. Now there's a lot more companies. So, they do a lot of approaching, but they also invite a lot of people to submit. And it's quite easy to find the names of these drinks incubators that they just encourage. They do funding rounds every year and they're looking for the future of drinks. I think what's interesting though is how the remit of these companies has changed. Like I always say, there's a lot of booze brands for like Sears white Australian guys, the industry is sort of been built in our image, but I think there's now a real recognition across the drink industry that, wow, there are these huge communities that haven't been served by beverage alcohol very well, and maybe if we were just a more diverse, more inclusive industry, maybe there's all these other founders and entrepreneurs that maybe have been historically underrepresented, that there's an incredible opportunity that we can empower. So I think it's interesting to look at drinks venturing, and business venturing has changed so much, even since I've been involved in the last 10 years, that historically they were looking for like maybe interesting things, but similar to what they had, where now they've already got these brilliant things. Now they're looking for the transformational things for their industry. So yeah, it's really quite a change in venturing in FMCG in the last 10 years for sure.
Can you talk me through some of the things that you were looking out for? Because obviously this is a thing that, you've got these people with lots of experience there, but very, very experienced in the beverage industry, approaching you, asking you these sorts of questions. And it's obviously an attractive thing. So you got to separate emotion from the business. You're like, oh, this is like, do I want to exit it? How soon do I want to exit? And do I want to exit? And so talk me through what you were looking out for in the process and how whether you were navigating yourself, whether you were advised by other people. Talk me through that, what your thoughts were in this sort of time as well.
There was no thought. I can't tell you how like little thought we put into the business side of the business when we started Mr. Black. I don't think I opened an Excel document, with Mr. Black in the title for like a year and a half. We founded this business because we had a liquid that we were obsessed with. And we just thought, if we love it as much as we do, maybe other people will love it as much as we do. I think a bit of it was I was coming out working for corporates at the time. I was just a bit dismayed by the whole business side of the business. But no, there was no strategy. There was no like, oh, we can see an opportunity to take 10% of the coffee liqueur market. None of that. Like we just made this thing that I didn't even know you had to pay tax and GST. Like there was no, I knew nothing. And we just made this thing that we were utterly obsessed with. So when it did kind of come time to talk to different investors, it was a bit like, well, yeah, I mean, I think we'll get there, but maybe this investment helps us to get to where we want to get to, like a bottle on every bar in the world a bit faster. So yeah, why not? We'll do it. Fuck it.
So how did you navigate those things that you didn't know?
Poorly.
Yeah?
Yeah, poorly.
And what sort of feedback did you get to know that it was a poor response?
I think as these things, again, at risk of repeating myself, I was so unprepared for the whole thing. We just made this thing we believed in and then spent really the first 4 years just stumbling around in the dark, like the proverbial hotel room where you can't find the light switch. It was just that for the first 3 or 4 years. And we made some bad deals. We burnt some bridges that we shouldn't have. We didn't do a lot of things right in the early years. But I suppose what was great for us is we were always so confident in the product. We had this brilliant product with a great name, an incredible liquid that looked quite striking. And that really allowed us the time to really fuck everything else up because we had this thing that we believed in so much. And it was also like, we had a pretty honest conversation with ourselves and our, distributors and like, well, we'll keep making it if people keep buying it. There was never this like, growth at any cost. I mean, that came in later, but at the start we were just so obsessed with this thing we had made, and that really allowed us to mess up almost everything else for at least 3 years. But eventually we got our shit together and we got the right people in the business and got the right advice and get a good accountant, get a good lawyer, all that type of thing, get a good bookkeeper. And we started to get things a bit better off. But no, it was a shambles for 3 years.
How did you find those people? How did you flesh out that network? Was it really just calling out? You said you listened to an episode of a podcast with Stu Gregor. Was it a matter of calling people like that?
Yes.
And go, who do you use?
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. So I always say to my team, if you're ever Googling for the answer, you are going to get ripped off. The easiest way to find someone is to ask someone. And I think that's why I think ultimately our growth and our business really suffered at the start, because you go back to 2013, there was no craft spirit industry in Australia. There was no network. There was the Australian Distillers Association was nascent and very Tasmanian focused. Cocktail bars weren't really buying any Australian spirits. There was, a shadow of what it is now, right? So there were not many people we could ask. We launched 3 months before Four Pillars did, so there was no one you could ask. And I'm a big believer in entrepreneurial karma. So that's why anyone that hits me up on LinkedIn and is like, do you have someone that does this? Or can we chat about that? I always say yes, because it would have saved us years and a lot of money had we had those great connections to the right people. I got a great bottle supplier now. I've got a great cap supplier out of Bulgaria that makes the best caps, the best caps. We've never had one fail. Anyone wants them, they're called Herty. They're great. They're brilliant, and we went through so many different cap suppliers to try and find them. So yeah, entrepreneurial karma, I'll pass it on to anyone now. But at the start, it was very hard.
Let's fast forward to now. Talk me through your role, what it is you do now. And I know that it can be quite abstract. The title can mean a whole bunch of different things as well. So talk me through the title, what the role involves, and then maybe how people can prepare themselves for this sort of role at various stages within their careers.
Yeah, so my title is now founder, period. There's no founder and CEO. There's it's just founder. And that was a really hard transition to make. One day you've got 35 staff and I think it was 14 mortgages and 16 kids or whatever, you're in the company that sort of rely on this business being able to pay its people. So you have that one day, the overdraft is on my apartment, and everything I ever had or owned was Mr. Black, right? So that's one day. And then you squiggle on a bit of paper and do some things on DocuSign or whatever. And then all of a sudden, that's not the case on the Tuesday. And that's a light switch, but it doesn't happen that quick in your brain. So there's this, and everyone, it's not like having a difficult time letting go. It's just a real transition that needs to be made. And often, if you're there through the transition to Diageo, which is what I am, different things integrate at different times and different periods, and you're still the figurehead of the business, right? So it was a real challenge. And I don't think that's easy for anyone to navigate. And I certainly found it difficult period. It was a really challenging time, obviously with a huge excitement of doing what we ultimately set out to do. And a real, in business, you very seldom get to draw a line in the sand and be like, wow, that we won. That's what we did, what we set out to do. And so that was incredible. But then followed by what was a really difficult year afterwards of adjustment for me, adjustment for the business, adjustment for Diageo. Same time we're selling better than we ever have. So it was a really difficult, challenging, hard, interesting, fun year. And I don't think there's anything you can do to set yourself up for it. Something that is just existential for you for 10 years. All of a sudden, one day you sign a bit of paper and click a DocuSign. That's not. It's a weird one. So my job as founder, I travel the world and get to talk to bartenders and our sales reps mostly about how great coffee is and why people should drink more of it, preferably in the evening. So that's my job. That's 90% of what I do is traveling and talking to people about the wonderful thing that's Mr. Black.
Right. Brand-oriented role.
100%.
Right?
100%. Yeah,
right.
Brand ambassador at large. Yeah.
So even though the title is founder, it very much takes a brand ambassador sort of
absolutely
position for Mr. Black now within this. Is it via the JV, this Distill Ventures thing, or how does that work?
Mr. Black is now as Diageo as Bailey's or Johnny Walker. So it's a wholly owned Diageo brand.
That was in 2022?
It was, yeah.
Mid-2022?
And October 2022.
October, yeah. I remember that because I started with Diageo at the time, and I remember the news coming through, and I think I sent you a message going, oh, hey, congrats.
Yeah, it's a big day.
So yeah, it's been a couple of years since then.
Yeah.
We're in 2024 now, start of 2024. Talk me through then what that looks like from you here. How does that sort of handover to the business look moving forward from here?
Integration is always difficult. I don't know any founder that's ever sold their business that said it was a breeze. Especially imagine you're selling your business is because things generally are going either really well or really not well. In our case, things were going really, really well, which is why Diageo wanted to buy it from us. And so you take a business which is absolutely, flying. You have a team that's so embedded and so purpose-driven. Everyone knew exactly what they were going to do, what we spent $1 on that would drive growth for the brand, so focused, been working with the same distributor partners for a very long time. And all of a sudden, the rugs pulled a bit on that, right? So even though not a lot's changed, we still have a lot of the same distributors, a lot of the same team, it is a bit destabilizing. So for us, the integration process was really about, helping to create a bit of stability in this world where everything was changing. And ultimately, for Diageo, they were really sort of keen to know about, well, you grow Mr. Black a very different way to how we grow Johnny Walker, for instance. How do these worlds meet, and how do we scale that up and how do we continue to do more of that? And I think what's interesting about in 2024 as we write this, the world's the hard place to sell premium spirits in. And I don't think many companies in the world are sitting around going, we've got the answer. We've got this nailed. We've got no dramas. We're just going to go and sell booze, maybe like it was in 2022. So I think it sort of dovetails quite nicely with everyone kind of knew that, how Mr. Black chooses to grow its brand is probably a pretty good way about how a lot of brands should continue to grow. And so they were pretty receptive to all that type of thing. And ultimately, we're growing really well. So why wouldn't they? You're
known for doing collabs with other brands as well.
Yeah.
Is that something that has really helped to embed you within the industry and grow the brand? Or are there some other things that you think have been more successful for you in your brand development?
We've loved working with other businesses. We've done clubs with Whistlepig, with Bundy, with Starwood. We love working with other like-minded brands on the same thing. I think that the only reason those things work is the sort of bit that comes before that, which is sort of the second point of your question there, which is we're known for being the coffee guys. And we've stayed so diligently focused on just being the coffee guys. That's what our brand is. That's what we're known for. Globally, you can talk to anyone and in the industry and ask them, oh, what's Mr. Black? Oh, they make that really great high quality coffee liquor. They don't go, oh, they're a craft distillery that makes 75 different products from just north of Sydney, Australia. So I think because we're known for doing one thing really well, that makes the idea of collaborating with other brands quite easy because they're like, oh, cool. Well, Mr. Black, the high quality coffee guys, we're the whiskey guys. This is going to be delicious, right? But if we stood for something more broad or maybe a bit less specific, working with other brands wouldn't work as well. So I think that's why Mr. Black's always been a great collaborative brand because coffee tastes good with everything. At a fundamental liquid level, it's pretty easy to make delicious things with Mr. Black. But two, brands people like coffee. So yeah, it works quite well.
Something that I've seen in the last 10 years, longer than that, but in the last 10 years, brands seem to be getting more granular and more niche in the market that they're trying to serve, which obviously narrows the market that they can serve. How do you see those brands today evolving and being able to sustainably serve that market? Because you define there that you're the coffee guys,
yeah,
right, within booze.
Yeah.
But to actually fight competition now, it seems that they've got to get more granular.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting one. I think if you want to get in the business of, picking success and failure, you've got to be pretty used to being wrong way more than half the time. And there are so many brands that launch and you think like, wow, that's pretty niche, or that flies against a lot of industry trends, or, that's a bit different to what I'm used to. And you're like, I don't know if that's going to be a thing. And turns out a lot of these things come along, whether in the US it's Slow and Low, Rock and Rye, 120 ml cans. If you told me that was an interesting business, I'd be like, maybe not. But 5 years ago, they were on every countertop in every liquor store in North America, or a great company like Bilson's in Australia. If you'd told me a full sugar, low ABV, fun flavored RTD business would represent a seismic change to the Australian RTD landscape, I'd probably have said no, but man, look at them.
Yeah.
Look at them go, and how good they are at storytelling online. So I struggle with niche, especially in booze, what's niche? You know what I mean? It's just maybe that's just a category that people haven't discovered yet, And so when people are telling me they're going to launch a new caramel flavored Calvados, it's easy to go, well, I don't think Calvados is a big opportunity, especially flavored cup. Maybe it is, maybe they're incredible storytellers. There wasn't a market for cinnamon whiskey until Fireball made it. And I think they're the second largest liqueur brand in the world now. So yeah, it's a weird one. I think I'm less worried about the niche and more like, how good is this business at connecting what they make with the people that might want to drink it? I think that's why Bilson's is so great, is they nail that bit. And ultimately why Mr. Black kind of could grow a bit faster than maybe some others was we just got really good at working out who might like us, coffee drinkers and people who like cocktails. And we got pretty good at being able to talk to them at scale.
How can people achieve cut through in telling that story? Maybe they've got a great story, but they might feel like they can't achieve that cut through.
I think there's no one way, but in broad brushstrokes, I think most companies that I've seen that are disproportionately successful when they're small generally use new or undervalued media to talk to their drinkers. So 4 Pillars definitely did a great job with PR. Obviously, Stu also running Australia's leading drinks PR agency. Some brands used, Instagram a lot coming up. When Instagram was the thing and editorialized food and beverage content was the thing, a lot of brands, made hay then. I think where some brands like Mr. Black have done great work is identifying YouTube as a great channel, or, there's some great whiskey makers in Tasmania that you might not know and you might not see them in their bar, but use TikTok so powerfully to sell their product to drinkers at home. So I think with a lot of brands, it's just an understanding of cool, who we are and what we make, and then spending way more time about thinking, well, what's the most efficient way that we can talk to them? And at the moment, TikTok generation, it tends to disproportionately be short form video shot vertically on an iPhone that resonates well, but maybe it's not, maybe it's not. So I think how brands can do it is quite simple. It's just cool, who wants to buy us? And then how can we most cost effectively and most efficiently talk to those people? And I think companies need to spend way more time thinking about that than they do what trade shows are we going to go to this year? Because so often marketing is going through the motions. It's we'll do a press release, we'll do these trade shows and, send out some email. Yeah, they're not actually thinking, great, how are we going to bring tens of thousands of new drinkers to our cellar door virtually, physically, metaphorically, every minute of every day? I think that's the big companies should spend a bit more time thinking about.
I appreciate that answer as well. Obviously, it does great things for podcasts and other forms of media such as this
podcast is
show.
a great medium, right? And so many businesses around the world have used it so effectively. And again, we all know them off the top of our head, Squarespace. I think they probably spend 95% of their marketing budgets on podcasts, have grown $1 billion business out of it. So I think it's recognizing where value is and what value means to you as a business and then chasing that. For some people, they bemoan celebrity brands, but really they're just doing that as well. It's your brand plus a media channel, i.e. a celebrity, or look at Better Beer. I mean, what an absolute case study in the strategy of identifying, Inspired Unemployed, a really clearly differentiated, quite simple, brilliant product, and then a partnership with a media network like them, entertaining, engaging. God, they've killed it. They're one of the largest beer brands in Australia now, by a few influencers and a really great product. I mean, it's just brilliant. It's so good. So I think it's just that. It's who wants to drink us? What's the most efficient way to find those people? And let's spend a lot more time thinking about how we can do more of that and maybe less time thinking about what trade shows we're going to.
Tom, I'd like to know, there was something in one of your answers, a couple of times we've brought it up, about being the coffee guys in the beverage industry, in beverage alcohol. I'd love to know an honest answer on how the coffee industry sees you guys.
It's an interesting one. I think people talk about imposter syndrome a lot. And I think I didn't come from a hospitality background or a coffee background. So for me, it was never like imposter syndrome. I was always just an imposter. I had a really, I guess I mentioned before, I wasn't good. I worked in a few coffee shops. I wasn't great. I felt a bit like Andy in Devil Wears Prada, like when the cerulean jumper scene, right? Where she thought that she was somehow above the fashion industry or the fashion industry didn't impact. I was happily drinking my mojitos thinking I wasn't part of the hospitality industry or somehow that didn't impact me. But I was at the Cuban place drinking mojitos in 2013. That's exactly what the hospitality industry had chosen for me. So I was an imposter. Like I was an absolute imposter in both industries. And I think for the longest time, it wasn't until we really started to get embedded in them and just stopped thinking our product was God's gift to the universe and started actually understanding what went into both sides of it, both, on the booze side about how booze makes its way to the glass in the venue, and then on the coffee side about what makes the coffees that we use so special and the process that goes into them and the people that go into selecting those coffees for us, what makes that so special. So I think the coffee industry for a long time was, obviously it's pretty inclusive. I know everyone has stories about snobbish baristas, but the coffee industry is full of like the most lovely salt of the earth people that are just there because they love this humble little bean from a tropical plant, So I think everyone was very welcoming at the start, but you would think there would be more overlap between coffee and booze. But in reality, I think the industries are further apart than maybe even we like to think they are. They exist with very different vibes. They're a long way apart. We always think baristas and bartenders can learn a lot from each other, but they're a long way apart. And the coffee guys are the weirdos and the bartenders are the cool guys, So it's a weird one. But I think the coffee industry now, I hope, what was empowering for us was realizing that we weren't alone, that we were just another continuing part of the incredible coffee culture in Australia. So while we weren't a perfect fit to be just another player in the Australian coffee industry, we are so proud to just be part of that continuing legacy of Australia's vibrant, innovative coffee culture. And I think that's the extent of it. Like we're very much a booze brand, but we just get to borrow the amazing culture and history and traditions and hard work and love and craft of specialty coffee and bring that to a new audience. So I hope that's what people think of us. And we also throw a great party. So maybe that's good as well.
They might like you for that reason alone.
They do. But if you've had maybe like 15 coffees throughout the day at like a coffee trade show, maybe an espresso martini is not what you feel like at night. So it tends to be the more a craft beer occasion after a long day of cupping coffee.
Definitely. What is it that you're learning or exploring at the moment? This is a question I ask in every interview, and I ask it deliberately very broadly. I'd love to know how you take the question and how you answer it.
Personally, it's an interesting transition going from owning a business, the sort of benevolent dictatorship, of like decisive, fast moving, to now a much, much larger company where decisions have to be a lot more thoughtful. We need to make fewer, much larger decisions because they just practically take a lot more work to get executed. So I think as Mr. Black grows and as I no longer run it, I think understanding about like how do we just be a bit more intentional with what we do as a business, I think that's a real challenge I'm finding at the moment and something I'm definitely learning. And how do we balance that with like the need to just do dope shit, because that's why people buy brands like Mr. Black, because we just do fun stuff, be it trade activations, tails parties, or new products, new collabs, all that type of thing. So how do we balance, how do we reconcile those two things? I think that's a big one. And it's a hard one. And I'm learning. I'm trying my best.
How are you navigating that? How are you learning? You're reading? You're reading books? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you talking to
I listen to
industry?
a lot of podcasts. I think being really clear about like what the long-term plan for your business is really helps, And I think as you get a bit bigger, you need to think a bit less like, microscope and telescope thing. It's a bit like we don't want to not think about what's happening today and just look towards the future. But I think if we're living too much in the present and just being reactive and impulsive and just doing fun stuff for the sake of it, maybe that's not so good as well. So I think really establishing like, well, where would we like this business to be in 10 years? Sure, we can keep throwing fun parties at Tails and Bar Week or whatever, but where do we actually want to get to? Like, what does success look like? And maybe now we're a bit bigger, and certainly in the context of a larger company like Diageo, how do we be a bit more stepped out in terms of like how we get to that? And we don't need everything this week like maybe we used to when we're a tiny company. So I think that's the interesting one. It's also, I don't think anyone has the perfect answer to it. You see brands of all size and scale. Everyone says focus is the right answer, be focused and just do one thing well and all that type of thing. But also, how do you keep that approach fresh and keep people interested in a world where people want new shit every day? So I think everyone grapples with it. But for us, it's just being really like laser focused on what we want to do, be the leading producer of coffee liqueur in the world by value by the end of the decade. So it's like, great, how do we get there? What are the steps to step that out effectively and make decisions on that lens, which is a bit less impulsive and a bit more structured.
Tom, you talked about a lot of collaborations that you've done over the past. How have these sorts of collaborations allowed you to find new and innovative techniques within the Mr. Black business?
Good question. We make one thing, right? Coffee, booze, water, sugar, roast coffee, cold brew it, blend it, put it in bottles. When you work with other people in other disciplines, you sort of realize that maybe what you do is really, really different, but maybe there's a lot of similarities in terms of what you do. And if you want to make whiskey, you can buy a book on Amazon, I'm sure. If you want to make craft beer, I'm sure there's a podcast. I'm sure there's a book you can buy, probably like a webinar on YouTube or something. You want to make coffee and liquor, there's no book on Amazon. There's no hardcover. There's no podcast. There's no webinar. So everything that we have, we built ourselves. The process, the way of working, it was all made by people with a Mr. Black business card, right? So what working with other businesses on collaborative products has allowed us to do is, again, a bit like a peek behind the curtain and work out, oh, wow, that's how they make whiskey at high volume, or that's how chocolate's made. You know, we do a lot of work with the guys at Cocoa Black or whatever. And then you work out, even though you do kind of different things, there's a lot more similarities to you than you would think to chocolate making and whiskey making than you might think to making coffee and liquor, which is not a distilled product, for instance. So a great example would be like we went and done a number of collaborative products with Starwood and have spent a lot of time with Sam and his production team down there in Port Melbourne. An incredible business. I love the business. And you're going through and talking about like how they handle grain. And you're going through and looking at this and you're like, wow, I think we could copy a few of these things. So I think that's sort of like, you know, how you like, I'm going to get my whiskey words wrong, how you grind grain and mix it with water at the same time to go into the whatever. Super cool. And that led to a lot of conversations with equipment manufacturers that make brewing equipment about how we could potentially handle ground coffee, which doesn't really exist in coffee production as we do it, or certainly in the coffee industry as we do it. So I think what's been great is working with a whole bunch of other people that we spend a lot of time making one thing. We're obsessed with it. It's all we think about. I love hanging out with people that do the same thing and that all they do at Starwood is think about making amazing whiskey. All they do at Cocoa Black and Pound Chocolate and Messina is make amazing, incredible coffee and gelato and chocolate. So I think that's why I love working with these other obsessives is all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, maybe there's something we could learn from this, or that's interesting. We hadn't thought about it that way. So that's probably been the most rewarding part of doing collabs is just meeting other people that are as obsessed with what they do as what we are with what we do.
It's interesting you saying that because it's essentially the experience that I've had running this show for nearly 7 years. I meet people across the entire food and beverage ecosystem and like I get to see all these sorts of things. And so it's I can appreciate that from a different perspective.
But it's not that different. And I think that's what's great about it. Just meeting obsessives that just do one thing. That's their whole life. Their whole job is just doing that one thing. You get to chat to them about it and maybe you learn something new every time.
Every time.
Yeah.
Every time. And then the great thing is that I get to share that with other people.
Yeah.
All the listeners out there who listen to this show, if anyone who's listening to this right now will know this, right?
Yeah.
They go through the backlog, they'll see.
Yeah.
I'd like to know where you're experiencing friction at the moment. And I also ask this question very broadly. What is it that's challenging that you're trying to get through, but it's pretty tough?
90% of my job is Mr. Black and business is great. It's going really well. So like 10% of how I spend my time is working with other entrepreneurs, small startups, people that haven't launched yet, people that are 5 years in or 10 years in or 15 years in. And I think that humbles you, you know, because, you know, Mr. Black going really well. You know, we've had a sort of a degree of success and I'm really proud of that. Seeing people midway through their journey coming up against a lot of the challenges that we came up, especially in the sort of current economic environment, this sort of post-COVID cost of living crisis, inflationary environment, it's tough. And I think I can't help but feel for a lot of these people that I sort of work with and talk to and advise is probably the wrong word, but sort of try and pass on how we sort of overcame certain roadblocks at certain points. That for me causes me a lot of internal turmoil because I just feel for these founders and people running these companies so much. It's just such a tricky environment. I mean, it's never been easy to do business, but I feel like it's sort of the end of a pretty heavy economic cycle. Like a lot of businesses are really up against it at the moment. And that for me is, and they're great businesses, like well-run, dedicated, lovely, purpose-driven. incredible outfits that make genuinely delicious shit. Probably a lot of them are inflection points, so they're really struggling to get to that next level out and keep their business growing. So that for me